Welcome to NTD Good Morning.
Here are today's top stories. Frigid temperatures sweep the U.S. as intense lake effect snow lashes the Midwest and Great Lakes region, creating dangerous travel conditions for many in the area.
Tensions rise over Greenland as President Trump says he no longer feels obligated to think purely of peace in pursuing the Arctic island.
The Department of Justice is investigating after a group of activists disrupted a Sunday church service in Minnesota. DOJ officials say they're working around the clock and will prosecute any violations of federal law.
The Trump administration is highlighting the success of immigration operations in Minnesota. What Homeland Security Kristi Noem is saying about arrest numbers amid backlash from state and local leaders.
The Indiana Hoosiers have completed their dream season with their first ever national title. NTD's Dave Martin joins us to discuss.
And 1 year since the start of the second Trump administration, how has the president shaped the economy and the world outside America's borders? We have a recap of the past year.
This is NTD Good Morning, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here are Stephanie Cox and Carrie Dunst.
Good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Today's Tuesday, January 20th. You're watching NTD Good Morning. In today's top news, intense lake effect snow bands lashing the Midwest and Great Lakes region, creating dangerous travel conditions. So dangerous that dozens of cars were involved in an accident, shutting down a stretch of road for hours.
Yeah, it was a wild scene. The inclement weather caused major problems there today, but the winter weather is expected to affect the majority of the country before the week is up.
More than 100 cars and several jackknifed semi-trucks sprawled all over the road for hours Monday after they were involved in a pileup on a Michigan interstate. The local sheriff says it began just before 10:30 a.m. on Interstate 196 in Zeeland Township near Grand Rapids.
Holy.
This video from a driver who was involved in the pileup shows the aftermath, with cars smashed up against semi-trucks.
Goes back for miles.
He says there were whiteout conditions from a snowstorm ahead of the crash.
We believe what happened is that a vehicle struck a semi-truck, a tractor trailer. That then set off a chain reaction. I can tell you that a couple dozen tractor trailers were involved in this incident, included in the 100 vehicles that were involved.
The accident prompted the closure of the interstate in both directions between two exits, while authorities worked to clear the wreckage. The Ottawa County Sheriff's Office says there were no fatalities and 10 people suffered minor injuries.
Yeah, about 100 cars.
All right. While dangerous subzero wind chills are gripping the Midwest and Great Lakes, frigid cold temperatures 20 to 30 degrees below average are expected to affect many parts of the U.S. soon.
Stay safe out there. Now, next, we have the latest on Greenland. President Trump saying he no longer feels obligated to think purely of peace in his push to acquire the Arctic island.
NTD's Dana Manhunt reports on that, plus other updates as tensions over the territory continue to simmer.
President Trump made the comments when replying to a joint message from Norwegian Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre and Finnish President Alexander Stubb. Trump wrote, quote, "Considering your country decided not to give me the Nobel Peace Prize for having stopped 8 wars plus, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace, although it will always be predominant." Trump says he can now focus on what's best for the United States of America. The president later brushed aside interest in the Nobel Peace Prize, saying that he cared more about saving lives. And Trump yesterday accused Denmark of failing to do enough to secure Greenland before boarding Air Force One.
They can't protect it. Denmark, they're wonderful people. And I know the leaders are very good people, but they don't even go there. And, you know, because the boat went there 500 years ago and then left, that doesn't give you title to property.
Trump says NATO has been warning Denmark for decades to safeguard Greenland against the Russian threat.
And it's not only Russia, it's also China. So we'll see what happens. But let's put it this way. It's going to be a very interesting Davos.
Trump has said that U.S. acquisition of the island is critical to U.S. national security. UN Ambassador Mike Waltz discusses why President Trump wants Greenland, speaking on Fox News.
If you look at Denmark's defense expenditures, they have 0 heavy icebreakers. They really have no Navy in the Western Hemisphere to speak of, and they certainly aren't contributing in a meaningful way to the Golden Dome, space, or other types of missile defense we have to have. Meanwhile, look at Russia with over 60 icebreakers, some nuclear. The Chinese are building more. They're pushing up into the natural resources that are up there.
Trump also discussed another island on Truth Social yesterday, writing, "Shockingly, our brilliant NATO ally, the United Kingdom, is currently planning to give away the island of Diego Garcia, the site of a vital U.S. military base, to Mauritius, and to do so for no reason whatsoever." Trump wrote that China and Russia, international powers who only recognize strength, must have noticed the act. The president wrote, quote, "The UK giving away extremely important land is an act of great stupidity, and is another in a very long line of national security reasons why Greenland has to be acquired." Trump also wrote on Truth Social that he had a very good telephone call with Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, concerning Greenland. Trump says he agreed to a meeting of the various parties in Davos, Switzerland, and wrote, quote, "As I expressed to everyone, very plainly, Greenland is imperative for national and world security. There can be no going back. On that, everyone agrees." Denmark increased its military presence in Greenland yesterday, sending additional troops to the Arctic territory. About 100 soldiers are already in Nuuk, with more expected to deploy to western Greenland. Daniel Monahan, NTD News.
Thank you, Daniel. And with Minnesota in the headlines, the Trump administration is touting the success of ongoing immigration enforcement operations.
We have the latest developments as arrest numbers climb and state and federal officials remain at odds.
Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem says more than 10,000 criminal illegal immigrants have been arrested during immigration operations in Minneapolis. She said Monday 3,000 of those arrests occurred in the last 6 weeks. Many of the arrests came under Operation Metro Surge, which began in early December. DHS has released new information about criminals taken into custody during the operation. They include murderers, rapists, gang members, and perpetrators of fraud. At the same time, the Trump administration is appealing a federal court order limiting how officers can interact with protesters. A judge earlier restricted immigration officers from using pepper spray, non-lethal munitions, or crowd dispersal tools against peaceful protesters. The ruling says that trailing federal agents from a safe distance alone does not constitute reasonable suspicion to warrant a traffic stop. Shortly after this ruling, DHS said it was taking constitutional measures to uphold the rule of law and protect officers and the public from dangerous rioters. Minnesota's Attorney General says the order was an important win for Minnesotans to exercise their right to protest. Federal officials are also renewing criticism of Minnesota leaders for refusing to cooperate with ICE detainers. The DHS has called on Governor Tim Walz and Mayor Jacob Frey to honor arrest detainers for more than 1,300 criminal illegal immigrants in custody across the state. The DHS says hundreds of offenders have been released rather than transferred to federal custody. The immigration operation is unfolding alongside major federal fraud investigations in the state. Secretary Noem says investigators have uncovered at least $19 billion in alleged fraud. In a post on X, she called it just the tip of the iceberg, saying Homeland Security investigators are on the ground in Minnesota.
And a Republican senator is pushing new legislation that would expand the federal government's power to revoke citizenship from naturalized American citizens who commit serious crimes.
He says it would be going back to a punishment Congress authorized more than a century ago.
The Stop Citizenship Abuse and Misrepresentation Act, or SCAM, comes amid fallout from the Minnesota fraud scandal and weeks of unrest tied to immigration enforcement.
Senator Eric Schmidt of Missouri said yesterday the bill would operate on the principle that if someone commits serious crimes after naturalization, it's evidence they never qualified for citizenship in the first place.
In a post on X announcing the bill, Schmidt said, quote, "The Somali fraud scandal reveals a hard truth. Our citizenship process is broken."
Schmidt says the bill has the backing of the White House. Earlier this month, President Trump vowed to revoke the citizenship of Somalian immigrants who were convicted of fraud.
Meanwhile, Christian leaders are condemning a protest at City's Church in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Pastor Paul Chappell, the president of West Coast Baptist College, is calling on the Justice Department to arrest the activists who stormed the church Sunday morning.
They were screaming and chanting, disrupting the singing and the preaching, because they suspected an ICE officer may attend the church. This is a violation of what is known as the FACE Act. And not only do we condemn this act, but tonight I want to demand that the Department of Justice investigate what took place in Minneapolis, apprehend those who broke the law, and arrest them accordingly.
One part of the FACE Act prohibits anyone from interfering with someone lawfully exercising their First Amendment right of religious freedom at a place of worship. The protesters who disrupted worship Sunday accused one of the church's pastors, David Easterwood, of leading the local ice field office.
The Minnesota-Wisconsin Baptist Convention called what happened an unacceptable trauma, saying the service was forced to end prematurely as protesters shouted insults and accusations at youth, children, and families. Miles Mullen, who's vice president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, said faith leaders have often led protests on social issues, but those should never prevent others from worshiping. In a post on Truth Social, President Trump accused the activists of being professional agitators. In his words, they were highly trained to scream, rant, and rave. The Department of Justice says the incident is under investigation. Attorney General Pam Bondi says if any violation of federal law did take place, those responsible will be prosecuted. NTD correspondent Jason Blair brings us more.
The Department of Justice says it's working around the clock to look into a disruption that took place at a church in St. Paul, Minnesota on Sunday. Activists entered City's church during a service shouting "ICE out" and "Justice for Renee Good." Good was fatally shot during an ICE-related shooting. DHS says she ignored instructions from authorities and drove her car in the direction of an ICE agent. The activists were also calling out the name David Easterwood, one of the pastors at the church, alleging that he's the same David Easterwood listed as the acting director of the ICE field office in St. Paul.
There are already 2 prosecutors from my office on their way to Minneapolis. We have an FBI team assembled and local prosecutors as well.
Dillon says the incident is getting the highest attention from the DOJ.
Because there is no more sacred right in our Constitution than the right to assemble and pray to God.
The church disruption was organized by activist and civil rights lawyer Nikema Armstrong.
This is Operation Pileup, more of a clandestine operation. We show up somewhere. They don't expect us to come there, and then we disrupt business as usual.
Tricia McLaughlin, the Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security, says that she's glad the DOJ is taking the incident seriously.
This shouldn't be a Republican or Democrat issue. These are worshipers who are practicing their First Amendment rights to worship, and yet those rights were trampled on.
Jason Blair, NTD News.
And as Minnesota is embroiled in unrest over the enforcement of federal immigration law, how has the nature of protest evolved over the years? NTD Sam Wong was out on the streets of D.C. to hear from the people.
How do you think the idea of protest has been evolving over the years?
To me, I'm a peaceful guy in a sense that even if you disagree on something, keep it low, keep it peaceful. There is no need for violence.
Yeah, I mean, to my understanding, protests have sort of basically, in a lot of places, become riots, and they're not very peaceful. And again, my understanding of Martin Luther King Jr. is that he was sort of all about sort of peacefully protesting and sort of strict nonviolence, so not sort of causing any harm to anyone. And I think that's a big issue.
I think that peaceful protest is definitely still a powerful tool, but I think that unfortunately it's been kind of overshadowed as people kind of get more riled up by partisan news networks and things like that.
The more that people disrespect authority and just don't want to follow the rules, it just gets more out of hand. If you believe in and want to take a stand, that's one thing. But as far as like organizing these things and getting those folks out there that are professional protesters at that point, I'd use the word despicable.
Just over the weekend, we saw protesters barging into a church in the middle of a service over in Minnesota. Do you think that's a good example of peaceful protest?
No, that's not a good example. I mean, they should be outside in the public area. They shouldn't be going into the church while interrupting the church service.
At face value, if protesters were trying to impede a church service, that's that's never good, and that puts a bad image on whatever the protesters are fighting for. It's a completely different judgment if the pastor was an ICE officer. You know, it's a completely different thing.
Well, I don't know. I would say regardless, you know, I'm not ICE's biggest fan exactly, but I'd say regardless of whether or not he was working for ICE in any capacity, it's a church. You know, it's not related to that. So I would say that either way, it really is no place. There's no place protesting in a church for that kind of thing. So
Church, temples, mosques, right? Regardless of what religion you are, those are the places of worship. Barging into like a religious holy place should not have happened.
I haven't heard the story, so we've been preoccupied with other things. But no, that's not a peaceful protest. Those should be places of sanctuary. They're off limits.
You are trespassing among someone else's liberties to worship how they would like to, and forcing yourself in upon that and changing that definitely damages their liberties.
Thanks to Sam for that report. And an Indiana judge and his wife are in the hospital after being shot at their home in Lafayette on Sunday.
Police say both victims are thankfully in stable condition.
Officers responded to a report of a shooting in a residential area 60 miles northwest of Indianapolis. They found the couple injured and shell casings at the scene.
The Lafayette Police Department said Judge Stephen Meyer had been shot in the arm, his wife Kimberly shot in the hip.
Authorities say multiple agencies are now investigating, but no suspect or motive has been identified.
Lafayette's mayor called the attack a senseless, unacceptable act of violence and said all available resources are being used to find who is responsible.
We certainly wish them a speedy recovery. Up ahead, House Speaker Mike Johnson is in the UK. Earlier this morning, he addressed the Parliament to celebrate America's 250th year of independence. We'll bring you the highlights.
And rallies across Canada are drawing attention to Iran's repression of protesters as demonstrators call for international action and support for the Iranian people. We'll have that and more. Stay with us.
Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. House Speaker Mike Johnson making history this morning as the first in his role to address the UK Parliament.
The address meant to celebrate 250 years of U.S. independence. NTD's Melina Weisskopf sent us this report.
As proud Americans, it is as though we have returned to the spiritual birthplace of our own nation. And the history here, the weight of it is palpable, as you know.
House Speaker Mike Johnson reflecting on the youth of America as he celebrates the nation's 250th year of American independence from Britain.
We have returned at a pivotal moment, obviously, in the great histories of our countries, to mark this anniversary that we have in our nation and to celebrate what we've achieved together in the past, and importantly, to face and overcome together the challenges of our present day.
The Speaker is the first to address the UK Parliament in London, saying that he feels a responsibility to calm the waters as tensions rise. President Trump now threatening tariffs on the UK and 7 other NATO countries to force a deal for the U.S. to buy Greenland.
I told the President that I felt that my mission here today was to encourage our friends and help to calm the waters, so to speak, and I hope to do so. As the Prime Minister said yesterday, let us look to agreement, continue our dialogue, and find a resolution, just as we always have in the past.
Ahead of Johnson's address, President Trump criticized UK leadership over plans to give the island of Diego Garcia, the site of a vital U.S. military base, to Mauritius, calling it an act of great stupidity. He said it is another in a very long line of national security reasons why Greenland has to be acquired. The House Speaker also used the historic moment to highlight the importance of the bond between the two nations and its weight to deter foreign aggressors.
We see China, Russia, and Iran grow more aggressive and emboldened as they intensify their efforts to exert economic, political, and military influence around the world. We see a callous disregard for basic human rights. Our long-term prosperity and security are currently being undermined by, let's call it, a crisis of self-doubt.
The Speaker emphasized that the free world depends on the strength of the two nations. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Thanks to Melina for that report. And as Americans watch growing unrest in Iran, Canadians are also taking to the streets to show their support. Last weekend, rallies and marches across Canada voiced support for protesters in Iran, calling for the end to the rule of Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Let's take a look.
Large crowds took to the streets in Toronto, Vancouver, and other Canadian cities, condemning Iran's crackdown on protesters and a nationwide internet blackout.
Streets in Iran are now full of blood. People are dead, a lot of people. And actually, some surprise news was that the government is asking the families of who have been murdered money to give them back the bodies.
All of my family all are in Iran. More than a week, I actually didn't have any connection with them.
We need help from all the countries, help us to get rid of this regime. This regime helps terrorism, to export terrorism to all of the world.
Protesters condemned Iran's leadership for what they described as a violent crackdown on demonstrators, calling for an end to the violence and urging international attention. Some demanded the Islamic Republic be toppled and called for Iran's exiled Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi, now based in the U.S., to return to Iran.
We're gathered to bring the voice of Iranians out. They want to have respect back, they want to have their legacy back, and they're tired of being taken hostage by the Islamic regime.
To my compatriots, you are not alone. This is our fight. We are fighting together. Be strong.
They can exile their ambassadors, they close their embassy from there. Iranian people want this freedom, and it will happen for sure very soon, very soon.
Iranian Canadians waved the lion and sun flag from Iran's pre-revolution era, showing support for those still protesting in Iran for freedom.
We are here to fight to the end, as their brave souls are in those streets right now, being murdered, being killed.
We want a safe place for everyone. We want peace for everyone.
The rally highlighted growing calls for international attention to Iran's human rights situation. NTD News, Canada.
Next, China says its economy grew exactly 5% last year, a figure that precisely matches Beijing's official target and is now fueling fresh accusations of data manipulation. China announced the number through state media. The figure comes despite mounting economic pressures, including a property downturn, weak domestic demand, and ongoing trade tensions with the United States.
Independent analysts dispute the official figure. The U.S.-based Rhodium Group estimates China's real growth is closer to 2.5% to 3%, while one prominent Chinese economist puts it even lower.
Gao Shanwan, former chief economist at SDIC Securities in Hong Kong, said China's actual growth may be around 2%. CNN News in China reported that he left his post after the remarks. All right, well, coming up, 1 year since the start of the second Trump administration, a recap of his approach, including tariffs, immigration enforcement, and military and diplomatic efforts to resolve armed conflicts. There's a lot to get into there. Stick around, you won't want to miss it. Welcome back to NTD Good Morning. Today it marks 1 year since the beginning of President Trump's second term. The leader of the free world took bold action to bring peace in places near and far
and usher in what he calls the golden age of America. We've put together the key highlights of this administration. NTD's Kevin Hogan is here to walk us through them.
This year was marked by massive change. President Trump's economic moves, global tariffs, hardline immigration enforcement, and one aspect at the forefront, grappling with conflicts and geopolitical challenges across the globe. Let's start there with President Trump's peace through strength doctrine. Trump is not afraid to use military strength to achieve foreign policy goals and protect Americans. Back in March, he authorized airstrikes on Houthi terrorists in Yemen. Houthis were targeting ships believed to be linked to Israel, dealing a major blow to global shipping, and done to stop threats to U.S. naval assets. In June, In Operation Midnight Hammer, Trump brought stability to the Middle East and the world and through decisive military action using B-2 bombers flying across the Atlantic Ocean, striking Iran's nuclear sites. It prevented the Iranian regime from getting weapons-grade uranium. The Pentagon says it set their nuclear program back up to 2 years. Then, starting in early September, Trump ordered military strikes on boats deemed to be carrying illegal drugs from Venezuela to the U.S. Trump says these were, in part, Tren de Aragua gang members acting at the direction of Venezuela's socialist regime leader Nicolas Maduro. They were on routes known to be used for trafficking drugs. All this building up to Maduro's capture and indictment on narco-terrorism charges. The Trump administration says Maduro is at the forefront of corruption, responsible for transporting thousands of tons of cocaine into the U.S. The socialist regime leader is now facing justice on American soil for allegedly harming Americans through addiction, crime, and thousands of deaths. So that's how President Trump used different branches of the military and law enforcement to bring about the so-called peace through strength agenda. But what does this non-military approach include? Here's how Trump used diplomacy over the past year. The president says he's resolved 8 conflicts around the world using different forms of statecraft. These span 3 continents. In Africa, between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Egypt and Ethiopia, and now in Europe, between Serbia and Kosovo, and in Asia, between Thailand and Cambodia, as well as Armenia and Azerbaijan, Israel and Iran, Israel and Hamas. At the end of September, President Trump unveiled a 20-point peace plan for Gaza. In October, Trump gathered world leaders at a peace summit in Egypt to make this deal official. This paved the way for the release of Israeli hostages and aid for the people of Gaza. And now the second phase of the peace plan is underway. That's diplomacy. But Trump had other ways to secure peace, too. For example, when resolving the India-Pakistan conflict in May, the president says he used trade as leverage to bring about a resolution. And it's trade, tariffs, and Trump's deal-making that are a centerpiece of this administration's global agenda. Here's Trump.
To me, the most beautiful word in the dictionary is tariff. The higher the tariff, the more likely it is that the company will come into the United States and build a factory in the United States so it doesn't have to pay the tariff.
That will take many years.
So just like we saw in that clip, many were skeptical of Trump's tariffs agenda. Let's see the results so far. Those tariffs raked in $265 billion last year. That's over $250 billion, more than 3 times as much revenue in 2024. Another direct impact, President Trump has secured 16 trade deals with other nations, lowering tariffs, securing investment, and helping American businesses to more easily sell their products in those markets. Taiwan was the most recent deal inked, bringing semiconductor investment. And 16, that does not include the temporary deal with China and the 2 deals, one with the Philippines and one with Pakistan, in which only one side has confirmed. So 19 total in the works. Now, back in April, President Trump declared America's massive trade deficit a national emergency. He credits his tariff policy with slashing that number. The latest monthly data, $74 billion in October 2024 to $29 billion in October 2025. That's down 60%. And the investments that Trump says are a result of the tariffs total over $9 trillion, according to White House numbers. On top of that is a new $250 billion investment pledge by the Taiwanese government. So that's about $4.5 trillion from the private sector and over $5 trillion from investments by foreign nations. Now, investments aside, many economists said tariffs would stifle economic growth and cause runaway inflation. Did they? No. And here's why I say that. In 2025's fourth quarter real GDP growth, that's adjusted for inflation, that's forecasted at 5.4%. If Trump keeps that pace up, you'd have to go back about 50 years to find another administration that did that. And inflation didn't change that much at all. Actually, it ticked down a bit, down to 2.7% in January. Now, we just discussed how the country as a whole is doing with some macro numbers. What about real take-home pay for workers? That's what you see right here. Americans are taking home about $800 more in 2025 than the year before it. Now, this is according to data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. That's extra money in your pocket. And of course, one of the biggest news stories in 2025, on his very first day of the year, President Trump established the Department of Government Efficiency, led by Elon Musk. The goal was to root out waste, fraud, and abuse. DOGE estimates its total savings to date at $215 billion. That's over $1,300 per taxpayer. So the economy was a big cornerstone of Trump's re-election campaign, but perhaps the biggest one was immigration. Now, these are the monthly encounters at the southwest border going from before January 2022 up until now. Under the Biden administration, border crossings were very high at sustained levels that you normally don't see, because usually it peaks and troughs over the course of the year in different months. But what we saw was very high levels, and right here in December 2023, that's when it peaked. You saw about 300,000 in just 1 month alone. That's about the population of Pittsburgh. Under Trump, encounters are at about 10,000 per month. That's because on day one, Trump declared a national emergency at the border. And then in March, to give just one example, of his enforcement efforts, Stryker units were deployed there. So now this whole thing that we're looking at encompasses what President Trump has done to secure the border. Now, that's the border. What about the interior? Well, the Department of Homeland Security says that about 2.5 million deportations have taken place since last January. 1.9 illegal immigrants have voluntarily self-deported, and about 600,000 were removed by federal agents. The administration says they're targeting the worst of the worst criminals. On the campaign trail, Trump said he would launch the largest deportation operation of criminals in history. And the arrests by ICE are a very big part of that. In 2024, from January to September, there were around 85,000 arrests, but under Trump, that number skyrocketed to 209,000. That's about a 150% increase. And it's brought a lot of protests and a lot of praise, especially from angel parents whose kids were killed by illegal immigrants. In January, Trump signed the Laken-Riley Act that requires that illegal immigrants arrested for heinous crimes to be held for immigration authorities. So we've covered Trump's military and diplomatic means to bring about peace, tariffs, and the economy. What's on the horizon? The Supreme Court ruling on whether President Trump has the authority to impose tariffs could happen within the coming days, but the exact timeline is unclear. And if the High Court doesn't strike them down, well, Trump says that middle to low-income Americans could get $2,000 checks by the end of the year as a tariff dividend. He also says this could be a year of big tax refunds. That's due to the standard deduction being increased and an increase in the state and local taxes cap. And on the security front, President Trump says that the U.S. military may soon start striking land in Mexico, attacking cartels. And overseas, the U.S. is in the second phase of the Gaza peace plan, and it expects that Hamas terrorists will go along with it. So, as we said, a lot happened and a lot is ahead. Back to you.
Thanks to Kevin for that report. And now a preview of what's coming up tonight on NTD Evening News with Tiffany Meyer.
Tonight on NTD Evening News, President Trump will be flying to Switzerland to address the World Economic Forum. This year's annual meeting features the largest U.S. delegation ever. Our White House correspondent Mario Tsu is covering the event on the ground in Switzerland. Tune in for that and more tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on NTD.
And coming up in college football, the turnaround is complete.
That's right. Indiana beats Miami for their first ever national title. NTD's Dave Morton joins us to discuss. Stay with us.
Scientists are monitoring a powerful solar radiation storm. They're saying it's the most severe of its kind since 2003. How they say it could affect us here on Earth. We'll have plenty more of that gorgeous footage as well up ahead.
Welcome back, and now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, Indiana beat Miami last night in a thriller. What do you make of the game?
Yeah, it was a really good game, even though it wasn't back and forth there. But I gotta say, at halftime, I was a little bit worried. It was 10-0. The Canes, I think they had 69 total yards at that point. It wasn't looking great. I will say, I thought Miami's pass rush on Indiana, Fernando Mendoza, really kept them in the game in the first half, held them to just 10 points there. They got to him early and often. They hit him, they pressured him, they sacked him. I think they got 3 sacks in total. In the second half then, Miami's offense really came to life at that point. They got a bunch of those chunk plays. Mark Fletcher, that 57-yard run early in the quarter makes it 10-7. All of a sudden, it feels like we got a game here. But then Indiana gets that blocked punt. That was like the play of the game, probably. And there were several for Indiana. That blocked punt, though, it really staved off the momentum, puts them back up 17-7.
You could feel that, shifted the momentum before that play, right?
Definitely could feel
Canes
that.
were coming on.
They had a different energy to them in the second half. But the Canes also had a number of critical penalties, it seemed like, especially on defense, on third down. Indiana took advantage on another of those. They had that offsides, I think, that Indiana, then they ran this run play up the middle. They got 20-something yards after that or something like that. Of course, it really came down to that fourth quarter. Indiana's last 2 drives, you had a couple of those very crucial fourth down conversions, those back shoulder catches by
4th and 5, right? Twice.
4th and 5. Fernando Mendoza, that 12-yard run where he gets hit 8 times. Mark Fletcher, those back shoulder catches, those were very impressive. And then you had the interception to seal it. So quite a performance there by Indiana on Miami's home field.
It's so impressive, and it really, I thought Indiana would run away with it like they did in their previous 2 contests. But Miami took them right to the distance. But as you say, that interception late in the game really sealed the game.
Yeah, Indiana, I picked Oregon to beat them in the last round. Just all disclosure here, Oregon ended up losing 56-22. I thought they would have a little bit of, revenge on their minds after losing to them in the regular season.
I thought that was the championship. But Miami really belonged as the 10th seed. They belonged there in the championship.
And Indiana, before that, they beat Alabama 38-3. I mean, this was. I had learned by that time not to pick against Indiana for sure. I thought this game would at least be closer because it was on Miami's home field. They had that incredible upset 40 years ago when they beat Nebraska for the title right there.
Indiana practically making it a home game. It seemed like the announcers thought they had about 60% of the crowd. And I want to talk about that because really 2 years ago, Indiana was not someone anybody even really prepared for. New coach comes, he worked under Saban. What do you think of the job that Cignetti has done? Where does it stand in the history of college football?
I'm going to say it is number 1. Listen, when he took over 2 years ago, they had the most losses in NCAA history. Northwestern has since passed them. Cignetti's gone 27-2 in those 2 seasons. Never before in their 100+ years had they ever won even more than 9 games in a season. He went 11-2 last year, 16-0 this year. Now that said, it is fair to point out that this transfer portal era makes turnarounds a little bit quicker. Now, when he actually got to Indiana, like I said, they had never had a 9-win season, but the scholarship numbers were down to just 40-something players. A full roster is like 80-something, so he had to bring in a whole lot of players in the off season. But of course, so you can say, well, yeah, he loaded up on the transfer portal, but this was still Indiana. They didn't get like those 4 or 5-star recruits, you know? They're the doormat of this isn't Penn State or anything like that. This is the doormat. This is the doormat of the Big Ten.
Talk to me though about that chip on the shoulder mentality that he seems to have fostered from these people who were not wanted by the big programs like a Penn State, a Notre Dame, even a Miami.
You know, he talks about production over potential when he was scouting. I love that one personally, you know. But I think he also said one of the big things was just coming to Indiana and changing the program culture. Like we said, over 100-something years of never being a winner. He said that was a big thing. He brought in, of those 40 players he brought in through transfers, 13 were from his guys from at James Madison, his previous stop there. So these were guys who had already, you know, known what he was teaching. They had already started to believe in themselves because they were successful there when he went to James Madison for those 2 years. So I've never seen anything like it. It's so impressive what Cignetti has done. Even like, you know, we were talking about, you know, he didn't bring in the 4 and 5-star recruits. This year's roster had 8 players on it that were a 4 or 5-star recruit coming out of high school, 5-star being the highest. Miami, meanwhile, 45 of those, you know?
Totally different recruiting situation.
It's absolutely incredible. So I'm blown away by what he's done, really.
And he has said, I couldn't have done it without the transfer portal, this quick turnaround. But he's only using the tools that every other major program has at their disposal. So you can't overlook what he has been able to accomplish. But I can remember my freshman year at Penn State, an undefeated season. We don't get to play Nebraska. You don't have the best 2 teams playing. It's before the playoff era. Then it goes to 4 teams. Now it's 12 teams. But even now, Notre Dame is left out, and a number 10 seed shows that they were belonging of the opportunity to play for the national championship. So now they're talking 16, maybe even 24 teams. What's the future of the college playoff picture?
You know, it hasn't quite been decided yet, but it's going to be decided this week. They have until Friday. Now, when I say they, these are the commissioners of the SEC and the Big Ten, which somehow I'm still not clear.
The Big Ten is like the Big 25 now, right? Which I love. I love them, and Indiana certainly represents, right?
Yes, we know that Big 10 no longer means 10, and Big 12 no longer means 12 for sure. But somehow these two are in charge. They've got to come up with a plan by Friday. That's ESPN's deadline. They are the sole TV provider here of the playoffs. Now, as you said, there is, you know, according to ESPN sources anyway, there is a lot of support for a 16-team playoff. A 24-team playoff, though, has some opposition, it sounds like, because that would technically you would have to end the conference championship games if you're going to end the season in time here. Now, personally, I'm all for the 16-team model, as long as it doesn't include like those 3 or 4, you know, automatic bids per conference, which I am not in favor of. I like the 5 highest ranked conference champions getting an automatic playoff bid. Now, I know sometimes that includes, you know, someone like Tulane or James Madison, who did not look like they belonged in the playoffs this year. But you never know. It could be fun to see an unheralded team like that make a run. We'll have to see.
Dave Martin, so great to discuss the playoffs and the championship. A lot to look out for next year. I'm excited.
Thank you.
And coming up, across the nation, Americans marked the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr. with commemorative events honoring his legacy from Atlanta to LA. People reflected on his message of equality, and NTD's Christina Corona was there and tells us more.
Americans across the country are honoring the life and legacy of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. In Atlanta, the King family attended a commemorative service followed by a march and rally with thousands in attendance, carrying forward Dr. King's call for justice and equality. Dr. Martin Luther King was a leader of the civil rights movement, advocating for racial equality through nonviolent protests. His efforts helped lead to the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He was assassinated in 1968 at the age of 39. The events began at Atlanta's historic Ebenezer Baptist Church. On what would have been Dr. King's 97th birthday, his youngest daughter, Reverend Dr. Bernice A. King, addressed the crowd.
When we see people strictly as others, strictly as enemy, strictly as disposable, we react rather than respond. We dehumanize rather than dignify. And when we dehumanize, we destroy the very possibility of community. That is why nonviolence is not simply a way, it is the way that heals, transforms, and leads us toward the beloved community.
She emphasized unity and said justice strengthens society. Members of the King family later participated in a march and rally to mark the national holiday. Here in California, a parade was held in South Los Angeles featuring marching bands, several cheer teams, Mayor Karen Bass, and comedian Cedric the Entertainer as Grand Marshal. Residents reflected on what Dr. King's legacy means today.
It means honoring what the definition of love, peace, and leadership is in the world. Everybody needs to understand how precious that is and what it took for him to sacrifice to achieve that kind of awareness in the world.
I just feel that Martin Luther King is an example of when we have a dream and we have the willingness, we can really live a life of fulfillment. And he spoke to unity. He was for everyone, equality for everyone. And I live my life that way.
Many residents here in Los Angeles say Dr. King's message of justice and equality still resonates today. Reporting from South Los Angeles, Christina Corona, NTD News.
And thanks to Christina for that report. Next, scientists are monitoring a rare and powerful solar radiation storm, the most severe of its kind in more than 2 decades.
Officials at the Space Weather Prediction Center say the storm is being driven by intense solar activity. Service Coordinator Sean Dahl explains.
This solar radiation storm, we haven't seen one this level at the severe levels since the year 2003. And this is all related to a strong solar flare that happened yesterday that caused these enhanced energetic powers to shower over Earth, along with this blast of coronal mass ejection, this strong magnetic fields and solar winds that move through space.
The Space Prediction Center describes a geomagnetic storm as a disturbance in Earth's magnetic field. It says these can affect things like satellites and GPS and even cause voltage fluctuation here on Earth. The agency says it's been busy notifying aviators, power grid operators, and FEMA, among others.
And the center has ranked the latest storm at a level 4 out of 5 for severity. The last time such levels were observed was back in October 2003, when the center says the storms caused power outages in Sweden and damage to transformers in South Africa. But the center also says increased solar activity can result in spectacular auroras. It urged people in the northern United States to look out for the northern lights. And we do have to wrap up our show here, but if there's anything you'd like to see us cover, shoot us an email at goodmorning@ntd.com.
I'm Stephanie Cox.
Carrie Dunst. We'll see you soon.